Hello, happy Monday. Earlier for a meditation session, I tried to do a multi-part sensory focusing exercise. So essentially what I did was I set the timer for 5 minutes, and every 5 minutes what I do is in the first part I did the usual breathing exercise. So closed my eyes and focused on my inhalations and exhalations for 5 minutes. And then once that's up, reset the timer. And then I found a spot on the wall in front of me and focused on that for 5 minutes, just on that little speck, that dot that I was seeing in front for 5 minutes. So that's the uh, visual sense part. Afterwards, the next one was on hearing. So I have some room music playing. And what I did was during the 5 minutes for the hearing focus, I tried to listen as intently and as detailed to the music that was playing. So I was following every note. I was following where the rests were going or how long a certain note was being prolonged, the chords that were coming in, and once there were layerings of the instrument, I was trying to focus on the different parts of that and where one instrument was going and another was going. And then afterwards, I did a little um, sensory touch meditation on my desk chair. So just for 5 minutes, focusing on how it feels, the type of leather, the stitching, all of those. And I did that for the main reason that I wanted to be able to train my focus better for a lot of reasons. Um, and two, also a way to kind of relax a bit. So essentially, that's the two main reasons for that. It seemed like a good way to start a working session, especially if one were to write and there's a lot of things going on in the mind. Um, I found that an effective way of clearing it or calming it down just enough to get started on writing um, one clear thing. And then a little later on, um, I was feeling a little anxious for no particular reason. It was a little cold, a little too cold. Um, I had just finished quite an intense work that really took my focus, and so at the same time, I didn't realize that there's some tension in the way that I was breathing while I was doing the work. So naturally, at the end of it, there were feelings of kind of like anxiety that I had. So I stood up, um, took a little rest, a little walk, breathing exercise, and I still had it when I went back here. Then, um, when I got back here, I received a note that looked suspiciously like a very serious message. Like the visual looked like something that would easily remind me of something that is stressful or something that's unpleasant. And so I looked at that note, read it, read the details, and then at the end of it, I realized it's nothing serious. Actually, a good note. It was a good message. But after reading it, I realized that that anxiety feeling was there, as though I read something scary or something stressful. And eventually, I realized that that feeling of anxiety didn't even come from reading the note or seeing that note. It was there way before it. But somehow, I was aware that if I wasn't too careful with how I place those two events in my mind, that a connection between them could easily be formed so as to make it look like that note was either the cause of the anxiety or that it exacerbated the anxiety. So I was thinking a lot about that, how curious that phenomenon was. Here was a very uh, neutral uh, situation. There's really nothing going on there yet. But there are already attached meanings, attached possibilities that could come with it because of how it looks, because of how it sounds like, all of those things. And then there's a feeling from uh, our bodies, from the body itself. There's the actual sensation that's felt in the physical body that may or may not have a reason of its own. Eventually, as I was thinking about it, I was reminded back to the meditation exercise I did, and how it was really helpful and calming to be able to just focus on one sense, just one, almost like one layer of this complex reality, this complex world. Which gets me thinking about how this world that we live in, the different phenomena that we experience, are also rich in both the way they feel towards us and in many other respects, in the meanings that we attach to them, the different things that are connected to them, right? And even if we focus on just that level of how they feel towards us by way of what senses of ours are activated when we interact that with a particular phenomenon, a particular situation, that's already complex. Like listening to, say, music and just focusing on the music itself, even when there was only one instrument during a certain section of the piece, the way one note could be prolonged and carried on to the next note, and how the dynamic between those two notes make the simplicity of those two notes individually sound complex, right? It's you take one and then one, but you don't get just two. You get so much more. And then you add another thing on top of all of that, a new instrument that now has that same dynamic within itself of having that seemingly simple, linear transition between one thing to another. But all of those things are also interacting with itself. Like the very first note you hear in a piece carries on up to the last note, even when it's not heard of anymore. And so, even on that level of one sense, just the hearing, maybe just the seeing, just the how it feels with your touch, those are already complex enough. But in our day to day, we experience them all at the same time. And then we add in the ways our mind perceives a situation. And if our sense organs are only here to sense one kind of stimuli, that the ears are only here to hear sound, eyes are only to see the visuals around us, the mind is thinking of more than one way of interpreting a certain situation. There are various frameworks at hand in our mind that typically apply themselves without our awareness of them, without us consciously trying to understand these situations in a particular way. More so when we don't try to think about how we want to understand it and rely on how we're used to thinking about things. I think this was a reminder for me of how illusory the particular framework of, say, cause and effect is. Right? Even in there are other ways of explaining how that's questionable in a cognitive sense. That how correlation is not causation. That even if, though one thing may happen after the other, it doesn't necessarily mean that they cause one another. And when we're talking about big concepts or the very serious things like medicine, for example, right? Placebo effect. It sounds easy to remember. Like, yes, if I do this one thing, drink this, drink this potion, drink this medicine, it won't necessarily, if it's a placebo, it won't necessarily cure the disease, right? But I find it interesting to think about how that same idea applies to and ought to apply to how we perceive our day to day as well. Like the mundane things that we perceive and how easily we might say this event was followed by this event and therefore they're related. That if we take a normal uh, activity, for example, waking up at particular time to do a task and making all those associations between time and that task, or how we feel and what we're supposed to do. Often, if we try to think about it, what we might consider as A causing B, or just really two random things that happen to occur at the same time and space, or to be perceived by the same person, us. And the different meanings that we apply to it, the different ways we try to understand these things, how the way this activity is done, and what that supposedly says about our self or our identity or our abilities or the worth of this existence, right? A lot of those aren't very certain, or at least not as certain, not as secure as we might use it to be. I think it's just a really nice exercise also to do, thinking about how in one particular phenomena, taking away all the layers off of it, right? Let's say watching this video, right? You separate the layer of you listening to it, what your ears are hearing, and then what your eyes are seeing, what your skin is feeling, how cold or hot it is where you are, what you can smell, how you feel on your inside. Are you relaxed? Are you anxious? Are you worried? Are you bored? Are you scared? Are you excited? Are you happy? Right? Separate all of those. Even with the emotions, sometimes there's a multiplicity in the emotions that we feel. And then the meanings that we might put into these things that we do. I'm listening to this for this reason, or this has found me because of this reason, or by this mechanics is this happening, right? And perhaps for a moment, instead of trying to distill all of these different parts into one thesis, one main idea, to just rest on these parts being varied, that there are multiple factors, multiple aspects to one thing, and seeing where the different things are actually connected to one another and where they're not. Yeah, that's all. I'll try to do that now in writing, I think. Thank you.